She was wearing my robe. Not a robe she'd brought with her, not something she'd bought and left at my house by accident. My robe, the pale blue terry cloth one I'd had for 11 years, the one with the small embroidered magnolia on the chest that my sister June had given me the Christmas before she passed. It was hanging on my daughter-in-law's shoulders like she'd owned it her whole life, and she was standing in my kitchen, pouring herself coffee from my pot, not even looking up when I walked in. I stood in the doorway for a moment. I'd just come back from my morning walk, still in my sneakers, still catching my breath from the hill on Birchwood. I'd been gone 40 minutes. "Good morning," I said. She glanced at me over her shoulder. "There's no oat milk," she said. "Can you pick some up today? I want you to understand something about who I am before I tell you the rest of this. I am not a woman who makes scenes. I was married for 31 years to a man who never once raised his voice, and I learned from him that quiet persistence is worth more than any argument. I taught third grade for 27 years in the same elementary school 3 miles from this house. I have held crying children who didn't know why they were crying. I have called parents with terrible news and found ways to be gentle about it. I am 64 years old and I have never, not once, been described as difficult. But I stood in that doorway, looking at my robe on my daughter-in-law's body, and I felt something shift in my chest. Something that had been bending for 8 months finally stopped bending. Her name is Tara. My son's name is Nate. He is 38 years old. He was, for most of his life, the kind of person who called me every Sunday and remembered that I liked my birthday cards handwritten, not printed. He coached youth soccer on Saturday mornings even when he was exhausted. He once drove 4 hours in a snowstorm to help a college friend move a couch. I am telling you this because I need you to know that the boy I raised was a good one. I need you to understand why what happened hurt as much as it did. Nate met Tara about 3 years ago at a work conference in Phoenix. He called me that same week, which was unusual. He normally waited until Sunday. His voice had that particular quality it used to get when he was a little boy and something wonderful had happened. A kind of barely contained brightness. He said, "Mom, I think I met someone real." I was happy for him, genuinely. He'd had a long stretch of near misses, and I'd watched him try not to be discouraged about it. When I met Tara the following spring, I tried hard to see her the way he did. She was pretty in a careful, deliberate way, always perfectly put together, always aware of being watched. She was polite to me at dinner, but the politeness had an edge to it, something performative, like she was doing a task rather than having a conversation. I told myself I was being too critical. I told myself I just needed more time to know her. They got married 14 months later. I flew out to Sacramento for the wedding, stayed in a hotel, brought a gift I'd spent 3 weeks choosing. At the reception, Tara's mother gave a toast that lasted 11 minutes and mentioned me once, in passing, to say Nate was lucky to be joining such a warm family. I smiled and raised my glass. The first sign of real trouble came about a year into the marriage. Nate called on a Tuesday, not Sunday, and he sounded different, flat, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. He said things were complicated with work and that they were figuring some stuff out. I asked if he wanted to talk about it. He said no. I said okay. I didn't push. What I pieced together later, slowly and mostly through things he let slip without meaning to, was this: Nate had left his job, not been let go, left after a conflict with his manager that had apparently been building for 2 years. Tara had convinced him it was the right move. She had, according to Nate, really good instincts about these things. What she did not have, it turned out, was an income of her own that could support them while he looked for something new. She'd been freelancing in some vague marketing capacity for several years, and the freelancing had, apparently, also quietly stopped. So there were 2 adults in their mid-30s in Sacramento with a lease coming up for renewal and no stable paycheck between them. And at some point during this period, I don't know exactly when the decision was made or how it was framed or what version of the conversation Nate actually heard, it was decided that the solution was to come stay with me. I want to be precise about how this happened because the way it happened matters. Nate called on a Thursday evening in March. I was grading. I do tutoring now, since retirement, 3 afternoons a week, and I had a stack of practice tests in front of me. He asked how I was doing. We talked for a few minutes about nothing. Then he said casually, the way you might mention you're thinking of switching coffee brands. Hey, so Tara and I have been thinking it might be good to spend some time near family. We might come out your way for a little while. Would that be okay? I said yes. Of course I said yes. He was my son. What I pictured was a few weeks, maybe a month. I have a 2-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus. A real house, not large but comfortable. I've lived here for 19 years. The second bedroom is where I do my tutoring. It has a daybed and a desk and shelves of books I've accumulated since before Nate was born. I thought they'd stay there, in that room, while they sorted things out. I thought we'd have dinners together and take walks, and maybe it would even be a chance to build something better with Tara than what we'd had. They arrived on a Saturday afternoon with 4 suitcases, 2 boxes, a garment bag, and a dog. Nobody had mentioned a dog. His name was Thor, and he was enormous, some kind of shepherd mix, very sweet, completely untrained. He ran directly through my screen door and knocked over a lamp in the living room within the first 6 minutes. Tara watched this happen without getting up from the couch where she'd already installed herself. He just needs to get comfortable, she said. I stood there holding the lamp. The room I had prepared for them was the second bedroom. I'd moved my tutoring materials to the dining room table, which I told myself was temporary. I put clean sheets on the daybed and bought a new set of towels. When I showed it to them, Tara looked at the room for a long moment, then looked at me. We'll need a real bed, she said. We can't both sleep on that. I said I understood that they were welcome to look into buying something that would fit the space. She looked at the room again. Then she said, What about your room? I thought I'd misheard her. My room? It's bigger. And you have a real bed. You could take this room and we could have yours. She said it the way someone says something obvious, like she was just solving a logistics problem. Nate was behind her. I looked at him. He looked at the floor. This is the guest room, I said, very carefully. You're welcome to stay here. Tara made a small sound through her nose, the kind that isn't quite a laugh but isn't not one either, and she walked back down the hall. Thor followed her, claws clicking on my hardwood floors. That was the first week. I won't catalog every day of what followed because there were too many of them and cataloging them would take longer than I have. But I will tell you some things. I will tell you that within 2 weeks, Tara had rearranged my kitchen to suit herself, moved the furniture in the living room, and established a habit of eating at 10 o'clock at night with the television on loud. I will tell you that Thor had destroyed 1 corner of my dining room rug and 2 of the cushions on my back porch. I will tell you that when I mentioned this to Tara, she said, He's going through an adjustment period. It's stressful for dogs to move. I said, it's also stressful for homeowners to have their things destroyed. She looked at me like I'd said something in a foreign language. I will tell you that Nate, during all of this, existed in a state of total conflict avoidance. He was applying for jobs. I know that part was real. I saw him on his laptop, saw the tension in his shoulders on the days he got rejections. He was not a bad person who'd wandered in off the street. He was a tired person who had learned, somewhere in the years I hadn't been watching closely enough, to manage his wife by simply not engaging when things got uncomfortable, which meant he managed me the same way. Any time I raised something with him, he would say, I know, Mom, I'm sorry, I'll talk to her, and then the thing would continue happening. The night that everything finally broke, I had come home from dinner with my friend Loretta. The real Loretta, not anyone from a story. Just my friend of 40 years who lives 12 minutes away and has been listening to me talk through my problems since we were both 24. She'd told me at dinner, with the kind of directness that only comes from 4 decades of friendship, that I had let things go too far and that I needed to have a real conversation. Not hints, not suggestions, a conversation. I came home at 9:30. The living room light was on. I went down the hall to use the bathroom, and the door to my bedroom was closed. This was not unusual. I'd noticed over the past few weeks that Tara sometimes went in there, To use the full-length mirror on the back of the door, she'd said. I'd said nothing about it, which I now recognize as one of many mistakes. I knocked. There was a pause. Then Tara's voice. Just a second. I waited. The door opened. She had been sitting on my bed. I could see the impression on the comforter. See my reading lamp on, my nightstand drawer slightly open, a glass of red wine on my bedside table, on the wood, not on the coaster that was sitting right there beside it. She had her phone in her hand and headphones around her neck. She was wearing, as I said, my robe. I looked at the wine glass. I looked at the drawer. I looked at my robe. "What are you doing in here?" I asked. My voice was quiet. It wasn't a performance. I genuinely didn't have the energy for volume. I was just asking. I needed some quiet, she said. Thor was being hyper and I just needed a break. This is my bedroom, I know. The way she said it was not apologetic. It was slightly impatient, like I was making something into more than it was. That's my robe. She looked down at it, then back up at me. I left mine in Sacramento. I stood there for a moment. I thought about all the ways I could approach this. I thought about what Loretta had said. I thought about the screen door, and the rug, and the cushions, and the kitchen, and the furniture, and the 5 months of Sunday calls I hadn't gotten, because Nate didn't call much anymore. And I could feel in the room around me the accumulation of all the small things I'd said nothing about. And I understood in that moment that my silence hadn't kept the peace. It had just made more room. "Tara," I said, "I need you to take off that robe, put the wine in the kitchen, and come out of my room. And then I need us to sit down tomorrow morning and have a conversation about some things that should have been said a long time ago." She stared at me. I don't think anyone had spoken to her that directly in quite some time. "Are you serious right now?" "I am. I'm just sitting in here. In my bedroom. In my robe. With a glass of wine on my furniture. Yes. I'm serious." She left the room. She didn't say anything else. She put the wine glass in the kitchen, not in the sink, on the counter, and she went to the guest room and she closed the door. Thor padded after her. Nate was in the kitchen. He'd heard. I could tell by the way he was standing, very still, facing the refrigerator like he was reading the magnets. "Mom," he started. "Tomorrow," I said. "We'll talk tomorrow." I closed my bedroom door. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. I put the wine glass on the coaster. I opened the nightstand drawer. She'd been looking at a photo I kept there, a photo of Nate from when he was maybe 7 years old, at his first soccer game, gap-toothed grin, holding up a participation ribbon like it was the World Cup. I closed the drawer. I didn't sleep much. The conversation the next morning was not a conversation. It became clear very quickly that Tara had spent the night preparing for an argument, and an argument was what she brought to the table. She told me I was overbearing. She told me I was overbearing. She told me I had never made her feel welcome. She told me that the way I spoke to her last night was disrespectful and that she didn't have to live with that energy. I listened to all of it. I let her finish. And then I said, as calmly as I could manage, "You're right that you don't have to live with it. This is my house, and I get to decide what happens here. You and Nate are welcome to stay while you get back on your feet, but there are going to be some rules, and the first one is that my bedroom is not a room you go into. The second one is that my belongings, all of them, are not yours to use without asking. If that doesn't work for you, then we need to talk about a different arrangement." Tara looked at Nate. Nate looked at the table. "Say something," she said to him. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. He said, "Mom's right, Tara. It's her house." I don't think she had expected that. I don't think he had expected himself to say it. But he did. And something in the room changed, not resolved, not fixed, just shifted, like a joint clicking back into place. Tara left the table. She was in the guest room for most of that day. Nate and I sat on the back porch for a while, not talking much, just drinking coffee and watching the birds at the feeder I've had hanging from the oak tree for 15 years. He said, "Eventually, I'm sorry, Mom. I should have said something a long time ago. I said, yes, you should have. I didn't want there to be a fight. I know, but there was one anyway, just quieter. He nodded. He looked older than 38 that morning, tired in a way that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with the years in between. I wanted to reach over and smooth his hair back the way I used to when he was small. I didn't. Things changed after that, and I want to be honest with you about what that change looked like, because it wasn't clean. Tara remained difficult. She was cold to me for weeks, and there were days when the atmosphere in the house was heavy in the way only repressed conflict can make a house feel. But she stayed out of my room. She asked before she borrowed things. The small violations stopped, and in their absence, I could remember some of what I'd thought I'd seen in her before. The quick humor, the way she was genuinely kind to Nate when she forgot to be performing. Nate got a job offer in early June, a good one, back in his field, remote position with a company out of Denver. He told me over dinner, and I could hear the relief in his voice. Relief and something else, something like himself coming back. They found an apartment in Columbus, actually, about 20 minutes from me. Close enough to see each other. Far enough to breathe. The day they moved out, I helped carry boxes. Tara and I worked side by side for most of the morning without speaking, which was fine. At one point, she handed me a lamp to carry to the van, and she said briefly, "Thank you for letting us stay." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't not one. I took it for what it was. Nate hugged me goodbye in the driveway for a long time. He said, "I'll call Sunday." He did. I went back inside after they drove away. Thor had left a scratch on the baseboard by the front door, and I made a note to sand and repaint it. I put my robe in the wash. I straightened the magnolia on the chest where it had gotten flattened, and I hung it back on its hook behind the bathroom door. Then I made myself a cup of tea, sat in my own kitchen, in my own chair, in the quiet of my own house, and I thought about how long I had confused keeping the peace with keeping myself. They are not the same thing. I know that now. I should have known it before, but I know it now, and knowing it late is still knowing it. I keep thinking about that robe. Something so ordinary. 11 years old, fraying at the cuffs, nothing anyone would want. But when I saw it on Tara's shoulders, I understood something I hadn't been able to name in all the months leading up to that moment. It wasn't about the robe. It was about what I had allowed slowly and quietly, one small thing at a time, until the accumulation became a weight I couldn't pretend wasn't there. I used to think that being a good mother meant absorbing whatever came, that if I just stayed patient long enough, kept the door open wide enough, things would work themselves out. And there's something true in that. Patience is not weakness, and an open door matters. But I had confused endurance with wisdom, and they are not the same thing. Endurance without judgment is just suffering dressed up as virtue. What I had to learn, and I learned it late, which I'm not proud of, is that clarity is an act of decency. When I finally said to Tara, plainly and without performance, "This is my bedroom and those are my things," I wasn't being unkind. I was being honest. And honestly, I should have been honest months earlier. Every time I swallowed something and said nothing, I wasn't protecting the peace. I was just postponing the reckoning and making it worse when it came. Nate surprised me that morning at the kitchen table. I won't pretend it didn't matter when he said Mom's right. It mattered enormously. Not because I needed to win something, but because I had watched my son disappear into a version of himself that managed everything by going quiet, and in that moment, I saw him choose differently. That takes something. It takes the kind of internal steadiness that doesn't come from never being tested. It comes from being tested and deciding, even when it's uncomfortable, to stand on the side of what's true. The three of us in that house were all failing in our own ways. Tara was taking without asking, which is its own kind of moral carelessness. Nate was watching without acting, which is a different kind. And I was speaking without saying anything, hinting at problems instead of naming them, which meant I was part of the pattern too. None of us came out of that period looking perfect, but we came out of it, and that counts for something. When they drove away in June with their boxes and their dog in their new apartment 20 minutes across town, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not relief exactly, but a kind of returning to myself. The house was mine again in the full sense. Not just legally, but in the way a space feels when it reflects the person who lives in it. I sanded that scratch by the front door. I repainted it. It took maybe 40 minutes and it looked good as new. There's a version of the story where I tell you everything turned out perfectly, where Tara and I became close and Nate called every Sunday without fail, and we all learned our lessons cleanly. That's not quite what happened. What happened is messier and more real. We are in a workable place, the kind of place that requires attention and honesty to maintain. And I know now that I'm willing to do that maintenance. I wasn't always. I am now. The magnolia on the robe is a little flat still. I've tried to coax it back, but the embroidery doesn't quite sit right anymore. I wear the robe anyway. June gave it to me, and that means it stays.